The afternoon shadows stretched long across the frozen prairie when Harrison Vance spotted something crimson against the endless white. A splash of color so vivid it made his chest tighten. Before his mind could catch up to what he was seeing, he urged his black gelding forward through the knee-deep snow, his breath clouding in the bitter January air of 1878. And when he dismounted, his legs nearly buckled beneath him because he knew that scrap of red fabric, knew it like he knew the sound of his own daughter's laughter. And finding it out here 20 miles from Fort Stanton meant something had gone terribly wrong. Harrison's hands shook as he pulled the rag doll from the snowbank, its cloth body torn nearly in half, stuffing spilling from a gash across its middle, one button eye hanging by a thread. Rosemary never went anywhere without Molly, the doll his late wife Catherine had sewn 3 years ago before the fever took her. His 7-year-old daughter had clutched that doll through her mother's funeral, through the long nights when she woke crying, through every hard moment since. And now it was here, abandoned in the snow along the trail to Santa Fe, and Rosemary was nowhere to be seen. He had left his daughter at the Morrison Ranch just that morning, settling her there while he made the 2-day journey to sell cattle. The Morrisons were good people, had 4 daughters of their own. Rosemary had seemed happy enough, though she had pressed Molly into his hands at the last moment and made him promise to keep the doll safe, because Molly did not like being around too many people. He had tucked the doll into his saddlebag, kissed his daughter's forehead, and ridden out before dawn. That was 8 hours ago. 8 hours, and somehow the doll had ended up here, which meant someone had taken it from his saddlebag, which meant someone had been following him, waiting. Harrison scanned the white expanse around him, seeing nothing but snow and sage and the dark line of pines in the distance. His heart hammered against his ribs as he tried to think. Bandits did not usually take dolls. Indians trading through here would have no use for a child's toy, unless they were trying to send a message, unless they wanted him to find it, wanted him to know they had been close enough to rob him without him noticing, wanted him to turn back. He stuffed the damaged doll inside his coat and wheeled his horse around, heading back toward Fort Stanton at a gallop. The gelding's hooves threw up clouds of powder, and the cold bit through Harrison's leather duster, but he barely felt it. All he could think was that he needed to get home, needed to check on Rosemary, needed to know she was safe, even though every instinct screamed that something was wrong. It took him 3 hours of hard riding to reach the Morrison place, the sun already sinking toward the horizon, painting the snow gold and pink. Smoke rose from the ranch house chimney, and he could see the girls playing in the yard, building something out of snow. He counted them as he approached. 1, 2, 3, 4. All Morrison girls, no Rosemary. Judith Morrison came out onto the porch when she heard the horse, wiping her hands on her apron. She was a sturdy woman in her 40s with kind eyes and capable hands, and the moment she saw Harrison's face, she went pale. "Where is she?" Harrison asked, his voice coming out rough. "Where is who?" Judith looked confused. "Harrison, what are you talking about?" "Rosemary. I left her here this morning." Judith shook her head slowly. "You did no such thing. I have not seen you or Rosemary in near a week. What is going on?" The ground seemed to tilt under Harrison's boots. "I was here, before dawn. You opened the door, you were wearing a blue dress. You said Rosemary could sleep in the girls' room, that you would make flapjacks for breakfast. I have been wearing this same brown dress for 2 days because I have been sick with a cough," Judith said, her voice rising with concern. "Harrison, you are scaring me. I have not seen you since last Saturday when you picked up those fence posts. Are you feeling all right?" Harrison pulled the doll from inside his coat. "I found this on the trail 20 miles out. It is Rosemary's. Someone took it from my saddlebag." Judith's hand went to her mouth. "Lord have mercy. You need to get back to town. You need to find the marshal. If someone took Rosemary and made you think you left her here, they have had all day to get away." Harrison was already mounting his horse, his mind racing through possibilities, through scenarios, each one worse than the last. Someone had planned this carefully, had either disguised themselves as Judith Morrison or somehow made him remember something that never happened. But the doll was real. The torn fabric in his hands was real, and his daughter was missing. He rode into Fort Stanton as the last light faded from the sky, the town's adobe buildings glowing soft orange in the dusk. The marshal's office sat on the main street between the general store and the saloon, and Harrison could see lamplight in the window. He tied his horse and burst through the door without knocking. Marshal Tom Garrett looked up from his desk, his weathered face creasing with surprise. "Harrison, what has got you in such a state?" Harrison told him everything, the words tumbling out in a rush. The morning he thought he remembered, the doll in the snow, Judith Morrison's confusion. Garrett listened without interrupting, his expression growing graver with each sentence. "That is a hell of a thing," Garrett said when Harrison finished. "But if someone took your girl, we need to figure out when. If you did not leave her at the Morrisons', where did she actually sleep last night?" Harrison tried to think back. His memories of the previous evening felt foggy, uncertain. He remembered being home, remembered cooking supper. Did Rosemary eat with him? He could not quite picture it. He remembered going to bed, but he could not remember tucking her in, could not remember her saying goodnight. "I do not know," he admitted, his voice breaking. "I cannot remember clearly. It is like there is fog over everything." Garrett stood up, reaching for his coat. "We need to get over to your place, check the house, and we need to do it now." They rode through the dark together, Garrett bringing 2 deputies with them. Harrison's small ranch sat 3 miles outside town, a modest house and barn he had built with his own hands when Catherine was pregnant with Rosemary. As they approached, he could see that the front door stood ajar, snow drifting into the entrance. Inside, the house was ice cold, the fire long dead. Harrison's hands trembled as he lit a lantern. The main room looked undisturbed, dishes clean on the shelf, Catherine's rocking chair in the corner. But when he pushed open the door to Rosemary's small bedroom, his heart stopped. The bed was made neatly, but Rosemary's coat was gone from its peg. Her good boots were missing. On the pillow lay a folded piece of paper. Harrison's hands shook so badly that Garrett had to take the note from him and read it aloud by the lantern light. "We have the girl. She's safe for now. If you want her back, bring $500 to the old Spanish mission at Capitan Gap. Come alone. 3 days. If you bring the law, you will never see her again." $500. Harrison made maybe $200 a year from the ranch if he was lucky. He had perhaps $80 saved, money he had been putting aside to buy Rosemary a new dress for spring. 500 might as well have been 5,000. "I do not have that kind of money," Harrison said, his voice hollow. "I cannot get it in 3 days. I cannot get it in 3 months. Garrett's face was grim. "Then we go after them. We track them down, and we get your girl back." The note said no law. The note also said $500 you do not have. These people, whoever they are not planning to give her back, Harrison. This is a fool's errand meant to string you along. We need to act fast. Harrison knew the marshal was right, but the thought of doing anything that might endanger Rosemary made him feel sick. He looked around his daughter's room, at the cornhusk dolls she had lined up on the windowsill, at the blanket Catherine had quilted, at the empty space where Rosemary should have been, sleeping safe and sound. "I need to find her," he said. "I need to bring her home." They searched the house for clues, finding little. No signs of struggle, no indication of how the kidnappers had gotten in or gotten Rosemary out. It was as if she had simply vanished. The only strange thing was a cup on the kitchen table that Harrison did not remember using, with a dark residue at the bottom. Garrett sniffed it and made a face. "Laudanum, maybe. Something to make you sleep heavy, make your memory fuzzy. They drugged you, took the girl, planted memories in your head so you would not realize she was gone until they had a good head start." "But who would do this?" Harrison asked. "I do not have enemies. I keep to myself. I do not gamble, do not owe anyone money." Garrett shook his head. "Could be someone saw you had a pretty little girl and got ideas. Could be someone thinks you have more money than you do. Could be random bad luck. Doesn't matter right now. What matters is finding them." They went back outside to search for tracks, but the wind had picked up and snow was falling again, covering whatever trail might have existed. Garrett sent his deputies to check with neighbors, to ask if anyone had seen strangers around, but Harrison already knew it was hopeless. Whoever had taken Rosemary had planned this too carefully to leave obvious tracks. He stood in his yard as snow fell around him, clutching the torn doll to his chest, and for the first time since Catherine died, he broke down and wept. He had failed to protect his daughter, failed to even notice when she was taken. What kind of father was he? What good was all his strength, all his skill with horses and cattle and rope, if he could not keep safe the one person who mattered most? Garrett put a hand on his shoulder. "We will find her, Harrison. I promise you that." But promises meant nothing against the vast emptiness of the New Mexico territory, against the hundreds of miles of desert and mountain where a child could disappear forever. That night, Harrison could not sleep. He sat at his kitchen table with the doll in front of him, studying it by lamplight as if it might offer some clue, some hint of where to look. The fabric was torn badly and dirty from lying in the snow. Catherine had put so much love into making it, stitching each seam carefully, embroidering a little smile on the face. Now it was ruined, just like everything else. He ran his fingers over the torn seam, remembering how Rosemary had looked the day Catherine gave it to her. She had been 4 years old, and she had named it Molly immediately, declaring that Molly was her best friend and would go everywhere with her. Catherine had laughed, had pulled both of them close, and Harrison could remember thinking in that moment that he had everything a man could want. 3 months later, Catherine was dead, and it was just him and Rosemary trying to figure out how to go on. The doll had become even more precious then, the last thing Catherine had made with her own hands. And now someone had torn it apart, thrown it in the snow like trash. Harrison knew he should try to get some rest before morning, but every time he closed his eyes, he saw Rosemary's face, scared and alone, crying for him. He wondered if she was warm, if they were feeding her, if she was hurt. The not knowing was agony. When dawn finally came, he rode back into town, finding Garrett already up and coordinating with his deputies. They had learned from the neighbors that a man and a woman had been seen camping near the river 2 days ago, but no one had gotten a good look at them, and they were gone now. It was not much, but it was something. The thing is, Garrett said, spreading a map across his desk, Capitan Gap is northeast of here, up in the mountains. But if they were camping by the river, they were southwest of your place. They might have left that note to send us in the wrong direction. Harrison studied the map, trying to think like a criminal. If I had stolen a child and wanted to disappear, where would I go? Mexico, Garrett said immediately. Cross the border, sell the kid to someone, disappear into the countryside. It happens more than people want to admit. The thought made Harrison's blood run cold. How far to the border? 3 days hard ride, maybe less if you know the trails. Then that is where I am going. Garrett shook his head. Harrison, you cannot just ride off into the desert hoping you will stumble across them. Mexico is a big place. You need to be smart about this. Smart? Harrison's voice rose. My daughter is out there, and every minute we sit here talking, she is getting further away. I am going after her. Fine, but you are not going alone, and you are not going unprepared. Give me 2 hours to get supplies together and find someone who knows the territory. Harrison wanted to argue, wanted to leave immediately, but he forced himself to nod. Garrett was right. Running off half-cocked would not help Rosemary. He needed a plan. He spent the next 2 hours checking his weapons, packing food and water, trying to think of anything else he might need. His hands would not stop shaking. Other townspeople came by when they heard what had happened, offering help, offering prayers. Mrs. Chen from the general store put together a package of food and refused to let him pay. Old Miguel, who worked at the livery, made sure his horse was well fed and rested. The community was rallying around him, but all he wanted was his daughter back. Garrett returned with a man Harrison did not recognize. He was Mexican, maybe in his 50s, with a weathered face and steady eyes. This is Javier Ruiz, Garrett said. He was a scout for the army, knows the territory between here and Mexico better than anyone alive. He has agreed to guide you. Javier nodded to Harrison. I am sorry about your daughter. I have children of my own. I will help you find her. They set out within the hour, riding south under a clear sky. The snow was lighter down here, scattered patches on hard-packed earth. Javier set a steady pace, stopping occasionally to study the ground, looking for signs. Harrison tried to be patient, but every delay felt like an eternity. On the second day, they found something. A campsite in a small canyon, ashes from a fire still warm. And in the dirt near the fire ring, a child's footprint. She was here, Javier said quietly. No more than 6 hours ago. They are not moving as fast as they could be, which means they are being cautious, or the child is slowing them down. Harrison felt hope flare in his chest for the first time in days. They were on the right trail. They were getting closer. They followed the tracks through the afternoon, Javier reading the ground like a book. 2 horses, one carrying extra weight. They were heading southwest, exactly as Garrett had predicted, making for the border. At this pace, they would reach Mexico by tomorrow. As the sun began to set, Javier held up a hand. In the distance, perhaps a mile ahead, Harrison could see smoke rising from behind a rock formation. "That is them," Javier said. "It must be. There is nothing else out this way." Harrison started to urge his horse forward, but Javier caught his reins. "Wait, we cannot just ride in. If they panic, they might hurt the girl. We need to be careful." They left the horses behind and moved forward on foot, using the rocks and scrub for cover. Harrison's heart pounded so hard he thought it might burst from his chest. He could not see Rosemary yet, but she was close. She had to be. They crept closer, moving from rock to rock, until they could see the camp clearly. Two figures sat by the fire, a man with a thick beard and a woman with dark hair, and between them, wrapped in a blanket, was a small figure with red hair. Rosemary. Harrison started forward without thinking, but Javier grabbed him, holding him back with surprising strength. "Wait," Javier hissed. "Look." Harrison looked. The man had a rifle across his knees. The woman had a pistol on her belt. They were alert, watching the darkness, clearly expecting trouble. "We need a plan," Javier whispered. But before they could make one, Rosemary's voice carried across the distance. "I want my daddy. Please, I just want my daddy." The sound of her voice, frightened and small, broke something in Harrison. He stood up, stepping out into the open. "Rosemary!" Everything happened at once. The man grabbed his rifle, the woman reached for her pistol, and Rosemary screamed, "Daddy!" Javier cursed and came out behind Harrison, his own gun drawn. "Let her go," Harrison said, his voice shaking with rage. "Let my daughter go right now." The bearded man leveled his rifle at Harrison's chest. "You were supposed to bring money. You were supposed to come alone." "I do not have money. I never did. This ends now. Give me my daughter." The woman was holding Rosemary now, one arm around her shoulders. She looked nervous, glancing between her partner and Harrison. "Frank, maybe we should just leave the kid. This is not worth dying over." "Shut up," Frank snapped. "We have come too far. He's going to get us that money one way or another." "I told you, I do not have it," Harrison said. "There is no money. There never was. You made a mistake." Frank's eyes narrowed. "Then I guess the kid is not useful anymore." He started to swing the rifle toward Rosemary and the woman. Harrison moved without thinking, diving to the side and drawing his own gun. Two shots rang out simultaneously. Frank's shot went wide, kicking up dirt near Harrison's head. Harrison's shot caught Frank in the shoulder, spinning him around. The woman screamed and let go of Rosemary. The little girl ran, stumbling across the rough ground toward her father. Harrison caught her up in his arms, sheltering her body with his own as he looked for threats. Javier had his gun on the woman, who had her hands up, tears streaming down her face. Frank was on the ground, clutching his shoulder and groaning. The rifle lay several feet away. "It is over," Javier said calmly. "Nobody else needs to get hurt." Harrison held Rosemary tight, feeling her sob against his chest. "I have got you," he whispered. "I have got you, baby. You are safe now. Daddy has got you." She clung to him, her small hands fisting in his shirt. "I was so scared. They said you did not want me anymore. They said you gave me to them." "That was a lie," Harrison said fiercely. "I would never give you away. Never. You are everything to me." They tied up Frank and the woman, Javier knowing how to bind them properly to keep them from escaping. Harrison barely paid attention to any of it. All he cared about was Rosemary, checking her over for injuries, making sure she was all right. She was thin and dirty and terrified, but she did not seem hurt. They made their own camp a mile away, wanting to put distance between Rosemary and her kidnappers. Harrison wrapped his daughter in his coat and held her while she cried, rocking her the way he used to when she was tiny. Javier stood watch, giving them space but keeping an eye on things. "I want Molly," Rosemary said eventually, her voice small and hoarse from crying. Harrison's heart sank. "I have her, sweetheart, but she got hurt. She's torn up pretty bad." Rosemary's face crumpled. "They threw her away. The mean man took her from their bag and threw her in the snow and said she was trash." "She is not trash," Harrison said, "and I saved her. I found her and I kept her safe. She just needs to be fixed, that is all." "Can you fix her?" Rosemary asked, looking up at him with Catherine's green eyes. Harrison looked at the torn doll, at the stuffing coming out, at the hanging button eye. He had no skill with a needle, had never sewn anything in his life, but he knew someone who did. "I am going to find someone who can," he promised. They brought Frank and the woman back to Fort Stanton, where Marshal Garrett locked them up and promised they would face justice. The woman, whose name was Clara, broke down and confessed everything. She and Frank were drifters, had been watching Harrison's ranch, thought he had money hidden away because he kept to himself and seemed to be doing well. They had drugged him with laudanum in his evening coffee, taken rosemary, planted the memories while he was half conscious. It had all been a desperate, stupid plan that had failed from the start. Harrison did not care about their excuses or their reasons. All he cared about was that Rosemary was safe, but the ordeal had changed her. She was quieter than before, jumped at sudden noises, cried in her sleep. Harrison stayed with her constantly, but he felt helpless watching her struggle, and she kept asking about Molly, kept wanting the doll that reminded her of her mother. He tried sewing it himself one evening, sitting at the kitchen table with needle and thread, but his hands were too clumsy, the stitches too large and uneven. He managed to stuff some of the filling back in, but the tear would not close properly, and he ended up making it worse. Rosemary watched from her chair, her expression growing sadder with each failed stitch. "It is okay, Daddy," she said finally. "Molly does not need to be fixed." But Harrison could hear the heartbreak in her voice, and he knew he had failed her again. The next morning, he went into town, asking around about who might be able to repair the doll. Mrs. Chen at the general store shook her head. "I am no good with a needle, never had the patience for it. But you might ask Grace Ryland. She is staying at the boarding house, just came into town a few weeks ago. I have seen some of the sewing work she does, and it is beautiful." Harrison had heard the name, but never met her. He walked to the boarding house, a 2-story wooden building run by widow Martha Stevens. Martha answered his knock, her face lighting up when she saw him. "Harrison, I was so relieved to hear you got Rosemary back safe. How is she doing?" "She is struggling," Harrison admitted. "Mrs. Stevens, I am looking for Grace Ryland. I need someone to repair my daughter's doll, and I heard she might be able to help." Martha's expression softened. "Oh, that poor girl would love to help, I am sure. She is in the parlor. Come on in." Harrison followed Martha inside, his hat in his hands. The boarding house was warm and clean, smelling of bread and lavender. In the parlor, a young woman sat in the window seat with a piece of embroidery in her lap. She looked up when they entered, and Harrison felt something catch in his chest. She was lovely, with dark auburn hair pulled back in a simple style, hazel eyes that seemed to hold both sadness and strength, and delicate features that made him think of the cameos his mother used to wear. She looked to be in her mid-20s, wearing a simple gray dress that had been mended in several places but was clean and neat. "Grace, this is Harrison Vance," Martha said. "He needs someone with skilled hands to help repair something precious." Grace set down her embroidery and stood, smiling tentatively. "I will help if I can, Mr. Vance. What needs repairing?" Harrison pulled the damaged doll from where he had wrapped it carefully in cloth. "My daughter's doll. It got torn up and I tried to fix it, but I just made it worse. My wife made it before she passed, and my daughter loves it more than anything. She has been through something terrible recently, and getting this doll fixed might help her feel safe again." Grace took the doll gently, examining it with careful attention. Her fingers traced the torn seam, the loose button eye, the stained fabric. "Your wife was very skilled. Look at these stitches, so neat and even, and she embroidered the face herself." She looked up at Harrison, her hazel eyes warm. "I can fix this, Mr. Vance. I can make it whole again." "I can pay," Harrison said quickly. "I do not have much, but I can pay whatever you think is fair." Grace shook her head. "No payment necessary. Any child who has been through something terrible deserves to have her doll back whole. It would be my honor to repair it." Harrison felt his throat tighten with gratitude. "Thank you. That is very kind." "Give me 2 days," Grace said. "I want to take my time and do it properly. Tell your daughter that Molly is going to be just fine." Harrison nodded, not trusting himself to speak. As he turned to leave, he found himself wanting to say something else, wanting to know more about this woman with the gentle hands and the kind eyes. But he could not think of what to say, so he just thanked her again and left. Over the next 2 days, he found himself thinking about Grace Ryland more than he should. He asked Mrs. Chen what she knew, learning that Grace had come from Colorado, that she was alone in the world, that she made her living doing sewing and mending for people in town, that she was quiet and kept to herself, but was unfailingly kind to everyone she met. When the 2 days were up, Harrison brought Rosemary to the boarding house to collect the doll. His daughter held his hand tightly as they climbed the steps, nervous about meeting someone new. Grace answered Martha's call, coming into the entrance hall with a wrapped bundle in her hands. "You must be Rosemary," Grace said softly, kneeling down so she was at eye level with the girl. "I am Grace. I have been taking care of Molly for you." Rosemary pressed against Harrison's leg, shy. Grace unwrapped the bundle carefully, and Harrison heard his daughter gasp. The doll was perfect. Better than perfect. Grace had not just repaired the tear, she had reinforced it with tiny invisible stitches that made it stronger than before. The button eye was securely reattached, and she had carefully cleaned all the fabric so it looked fresh again. Even the stuffing had been redistributed properly, so the doll's shape was right. "I added a little something," Grace said, showing them the back of the doll. She had embroidered a small heart there, right over the repaired seam. So, Molly would know she was loved even while she was being fixed. Rosemary took the doll with trembling hands, hugging it to her chest. Then, to Harrison's surprise, she wrapped her arms around Grace's neck. "Thank you," Rosemary whispered. "Thank you for making Molly whole." Grace hugged her back, her eyes shining with tears. "You are so very welcome, sweetheart." Harrison felt something shift in his chest as he watched them. This woman, this stranger, had done more to help his daughter feel safe than he had managed in days. And the way she held Rosemary, so gently and carefully, reminded him of Catherine. "Miss Ryland, I cannot thank you enough," he said, his voice rough. "This means everything to us." Grace stood, smoothing her skirt. "I am just glad I could help. Please, call me Grace." "Then you should call me Harrison." They looked at each other for a long moment, something unspoken passing between them. Martha appeared in the doorway, breaking the spell. "Grace, I am making stew for supper. Why do not you invite Harrison and Rosemary to stay? It is the least we can do." Grace's face brightened. "Would you? I would love to hear more about Rosemary, and I want to make sure Molly is holding up all right." Rosemary tugged on Harrison's hand. "Can we, Daddy? Please?" Harrison could not think of a reason to refuse, and truthfully did not want to. "We would be honored." Dinner at the boarding house was a lively affair. Besides Martha, there were 3 other boarders, all men who worked at the fort. They were respectful and friendly, and Rosemary seemed to relax a little in the warm, busy atmosphere. Grace sat beside her, asking her about Molly's adventures, making up stories that had the little girl giggling. Harrison watched Grace across the table, noticing little things. The way she listened intently when people spoke, as if what they were saying truly mattered. The way her face lit up when she smiled. The sadness that sometimes flickered in her eyes when she thought no one was looking. After dinner, while Martha was clearing dishes and the other boarders had retired, Harrison found himself alone with Grace in the parlor. Rosemary had fallen asleep on the sofa, Molly clutched in her arms, exhausted by excitement and a full belly. "She is beautiful," Grace said softly, looking at the sleeping child. "She has your coloring, but I bet she has her mother's spirit." "She does," Harrison agreed. "Catherine was the strong one. I am just trying to hold things together without her." "I think you are doing better than you give yourself credit for." Grace picked up her embroidery, her needle moving in quick, sure strokes. "You rode into the wilderness to save your daughter. You brought her home safe. You came to a stranger to ask for help fixing a doll because you knew it would help her heal. Those are not the actions of someone just holding things together." Harrison felt his throat tighten. "I let her get taken in the first place." "You were drugged. You were fooled by people who made their living fooling others. That was not your fault." "It feels like my fault." Grace set down her embroidery and looked at him directly. "My husband used to beat me," she said quietly, "for 3 years, until I finally ran away in the middle of the night with nothing but the clothes on my back. I told myself every day that it was my fault, that I must have done something to make him angry, that if I was just better or quieter or more careful, he would stop. It took me a long time to understand that some things are not our fault, no matter how much we want to take the blame. Some people are just cruel, and nothing we do can change that." Harrison stared at her, shocked by the confession. "I am sorry. No one should have to endure that. And no one should have to endure having their child stolen. But we both did endure it, and we both survived. That has to count for something." Harrison found himself moving closer, drawn by her honesty, by the strength he could see in her. Why did you tell me that? Because I can see you are carrying guilt that does not belong to you, and I know how heavy that weight can be. Because I wanted you to know that I understand what it is like to feel like you have failed, even when the failure was not yours. And because, for reasons I cannot quite explain, I feel like I can trust you. You can, Harrison said firmly. I promise you that. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, Grace working on her embroidery while Harrison watched Rosemary sleep. It felt natural, peaceful in a way Harrison had not experienced since Catherine died. He realized with some surprise that he did not want the evening to end, did not want to take Rosemary home to their empty house. Would you come to dinner at our place sometime? The words came out before Harrison could think them through. Nothing fancy, just stew and bread probably, but I think Rosemary would like to see you again. And I would too. Grace's hands stilled on her embroidery. A faint blush colored her cheeks. I would like that very much. Tomorrow? Around 6? Tomorrow at 6, Grace agreed, and her smile made Harrison's heart skip in a way it had not in years. He carried Rosemary home through the cold night, the sleeping child warm in his arms. As he tucked her into bed, she stirred and mumbled, I like Grace, Daddy. She's nice like Mama. Harrison kissed her forehead. I like her too, sweetheart. That night, for the first time since Rosemary had been taken, Harrison slept peacefully. The next day he threw himself into preparations for dinner with an energy that surprised him. He cleaned the house thoroughly, swept and scrubbed until everything gleamed. He rode into town and bought fresh vegetables from Mrs. Chen, along with a small bag of sugar and some flour. He even picked wildflowers from near the creek, arranging them awkwardly in a jar on the table. Rosemary watched all this activity with interest. Are you sweet on Grace? She asked with the blunt honesty of a 7-year-old. Harrison felt his face heat. I just want to be hospitable to someone who helped us. You are blushing. You only blush when you are fibbing. When did you get so smart? Rosemary grinned, looking more like her old self than she had in days. I have always been smart. You just do not always pay attention. Grace arrived promptly at 6, wearing a dark green dress that brought out the color of her eyes. She brought fresh bread wrapped in cloth, still warm from the boarding house oven. Harrison's stew was simple but hearty, and they ate at the small kitchen table, with Rosemary chattering happily between them. Tell Grace about the horse you are training, Rosemary urged. Tell her about Lightning. Harrison shrugged, embarrassed. It is not that interesting. It is to me, Grace said. I know nothing about horses. I grew up in cities mostly. So Harrison told her about Lightning, the young Mustang he was gentling, about the patience it took to earn a wild horse's trust, about the satisfaction of that first moment when the animal chose to come to you instead of running away. Grace listened intently, asking questions that showed she was truly paying attention. After dinner, while Harrison washed dishes, Grace sat with Rosemary and showed her some simple embroidery stitches, their heads bent together over the fabric, one auburn and one red, and Harrison had to stop and just watch them, his chest tight with something that felt like hope. When it was time for Grace to leave, Harrison offered to walk her back to town. Rosemary was already half asleep on the sofa, and Martha had said she would watch for Grace's return. They walked slowly through the cool evening, stars bright overhead. Thank you for dinner, Grace said, and for the company. I have been lonely since coming here. You are welcome any time, Harrison said. Truly, Rosemary adores you, and I enjoy your company. They reached the boarding house too soon. Grace turned to face him, and in the lamplight from the window, she looked so lovely that Harrison's breath caught. Would you come to dinner again? He asked. Not tomorrow, maybe, but soon. I would like that. Or perhaps you and Rosemary could come into town for lunch on Sunday after church. Martha always makes a big meal, and there's plenty. We will be there. They stood there for a moment longer, neither quite ready to say goodnight. Finally, Grace smiled and went inside, and Harrison walked home, feeling lighter than he had in months. Over the following weeks, seeing Grace became a regular part of Harrison's life. They shared meals several times a week, sometimes at his ranch, sometimes at the boarding house. Grace taught Rosemary to sew and embroider, patiently showing her how to make small, neat stitches. Harrison taught Grace to ride, finding her an even-tempered mare, and laughing when she clutched the saddle horn and insisted they not go faster than a walk. Slowly, carefully, they learned each other's stories. Grace told him about growing up in St. Louis, the daughter of a tailor who taught her to sew, about marrying young to a man who seemed charming until the door closed behind them, about the years of fear and pain, and finally gathering the courage to run. She had worked her way west, sewing to pay for food and lodging until she reached New Mexico and decided she was far enough. Harrison told her about Catherine, about falling in love when they were both 17, about building their ranch together, about the joy when Rosemary was born, about watching Catherine die slowly of fever while he stood helpless, about the loneliness of the years since, raising a daughter alone, trying to be both mother and father. They found comfort in each other's grief, understanding and shared loss. Neither was trying to replace what they had lost, but both were discovering that there might be room in their hearts for something new. Rosemary was the first to say out loud what was obvious to everyone else. One evening in March, when the snow had finally melted and the first hints of spring were greening the hills, she looked up from her sewing practice and announced, "I think you should marry Grace." Harrison, who had been repairing a bridle, nearly dropped it. "What? You like her, she likes you. You are happy when she is here and sad when she is not. That means you should get married. That is how it works." "Sweetheart, it is more complicated than that." "Why?" Rosemary asked, genuinely curious. Harrison struggled to find an answer. "Because I do not know if Grace wants that. Because it has only been a few months. Because I do not want to rush into anything." "You should ask her," Rosemary said firmly. "I think she would say yes, and I think it would make us all happy." Harrison thought about it that night after Rosemary was asleep. He had been trying not to let his feelings for Grace grow too strong too fast, but the truth was he was already in love with her. Loved the way she laughed, the way she was endlessly patient with Rosemary, the way she hummed while she sewed, loved her strength and her kindness, and the way she saw the best in people even after everything she had been through. But did she feel the same way? And even if she did, was it too soon? Would he be dishonoring Catherine's memory by moving forward? He found himself talking to Catherine's photograph that night, something he had not done in a long time. "I do not know what to do," he admitted to the image. "I loved you so much. I still love you, but I am so lonely, and Grace makes me feel alive again. Would you be angry? Would you think I was forgetting you?" The photograph, of course, offered no answer, but as Harrison sat there in the quiet house, he found himself remembering something Catherine had said when she knew she was dying. "Do not be alone forever," she had whispered, her hand weak in his. "Rosemary needs a mother, and you need love. Promise me you will not shut yourself away." He had promised, though at the time he could not imagine ever wanting anyone else. But Catherine had been wise beyond her years, had known that life would go on even after she was gone. The next Sunday, after church, Harrison asked Grace if she would take a walk with him, while Rosemary played with the Morrison girls under Judith's supervision. They walked along the creek that ran past the fort, new grass soft under their feet, cottonwoods just beginning to leaf out. "I need to tell you something," Harrison said, his heart pounding, "and I need you to be honest with me about how you feel." Grace stopped walking, turning to face him. "All right. I have come to care for you very deeply, more than I thought I would ever care for anyone again after Catherine. You have brought light and warmth back into my life, and into Rosemary's. I look forward to seeing you every day, and when you are not there, I miss you. I think what I am trying to say very badly is that I have fallen in love with you." Grace's eyes filled with tears, and for a terrible moment Harrison thought he had made a mistake, that he had moved too fast, that she was going to tell him she did not feel the same way. But then she was smiling through the tears, reaching for his hands. "I love you too," she said, her voice shaking. "I have been so afraid to let myself feel it, because I thought maybe you were just being kind, that you saw me as a friend and nothing more. But Harrison, I love you. I love your kindness and your strength and the way you love your daughter. I love the man you are." Harrison pulled her close, holding her carefully, aware that this was the first time he had embraced her. She fit perfectly against him, her head tucked under his chin, and it felt like the most natural thing in the world. "I want to ask you something," Harrison said after a long moment. "But I want you to think about it carefully, and I do not need an answer right away." Grace pulled back just enough to look up at him. "What is it? Would you consider marrying me? Not right away if you are not ready, but someday? Would you consider building a life together, you and me and Rosemary?" More tears spilled down Grace's cheeks, but she was smiling. "Yes, Yes, I will marry you. And I do not need time to think about it because I have been thinking about it for weeks, hoping you might ask. Harrison kissed her then, gentle and sweet, and felt something broken inside him begin to heal. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Grace laughed and wiped her eyes. Rosemary is going to be insufferable, she said. She told me 2 days ago that we should get married, and she wants to be in the wedding. She told me the same thing last week. I think we have both been outmaneuvered by a 7-year-old. They walked back to town hand in hand, and when Rosemary saw them, her face lit up with understanding. You asked her. Did she say yes? I said yes, Grace confirmed, and Rosemary let out a whoop of joy that made everyone in the vicinity turn and stare. They were married 6 weeks later, on a warm May morning, with wildflowers blooming across the hills. The ceremony was held at the small church in Fort Stanton, with half the town in attendance. Rosemary stood between them, holding both their hands, wearing a new blue dress that Grace had sewn for her. When the preacher said they were husband and wife, all three of them hugged each other, and there was not a dry eye in the church. Grace moved into the ranch house, and Harrison spent a week making improvements, adding shelves for her sewing supplies, repainting the bedroom, building a larger wardrobe. She brought little with her, just clothes and sewing equipment and a few treasured books, but she transformed the house simply by being in it. Curtains appeared on the windows, embroidered cushions on the chairs, the smell of baking bread in the mornings. Rosemary blossomed under Grace's attention, growing confident and happy. The nightmares from her kidnapping became less frequent, and when they did come, Grace was there to comfort her, sitting up through the night singing soft songs until the little girl fell back asleep. Harrison found himself happier than he could remember being. Coming in from working with the horses to find Grace in the kitchen, or sitting on the porch in the evening with her sewing beside him while Rosemary played in the yard, felt like the completeness he had thought was lost forever. But marriage was not without its challenges. Grace still flinched sometimes at sudden movements, still had moments when fear flickered across her face. Harrison had to learn to be patient, to move slowly, to earn her trust completely even though she had married him. He never raised his voice, never made quick gestures near her, always made sure she knew she was safe. And there were nights when Grace woke gasping from nightmares about her first husband, convinced he had found her. Harrison would hold her, talking quietly until she calmed, reminding her that she was safe, that no one would hurt her ever again, that he would protect her with his life if necessary. Slowly the nightmares came less frequently. Slowly Grace relaxed into the marriage, into the knowledge that Harrison was nothing like the man who had hurt her. She began to laugh more freely, to sing while she worked, to meet his eyes without the shadow of fear. Their first year of marriage brought changes and growth. Harrison expanded his horse training business, earning a reputation for his skill with difficult animals. Grace took in more sewing work, and her beautiful embroidery became sought after throughout the territory. Together, they saved money, improved the ranch, built a life. Rosemary thrived, growing taller and more confident. She called Grace Mama Grace at first, but by the end of the year, she had dropped the Grace and just called her Mama. Harrison saw the joy this brought to his wife's face, saw how she treasured being a mother to his daughter. On their first anniversary, Grace told him she was pregnant. Harrison had hoped, but had not wanted to push, knowing that her fear of being like her mother, who had died giving birth to a stillborn baby, might make pregnancy difficult. But when she told him, her face was glowing with happiness rather than fear. I want this, she said firmly. I want to have children with you, to grow our family. I am not afraid anymore because I know you will be with me no matter what happens. Their son was born the following spring on a warm April morning. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Harrison feared he might lose Grace the way he had lost Catherine. But Grace was strong, and Dr. Mitchell, who had come from the fort, was skilled. When the baby finally arrived, crying lustily, both parents wept with relief and joy. They named him Henry Robert Vance, and he had Harrison's dark hair and Grace's hazel eyes. Rosemary was enchanted with her baby brother, wanting to help with everything, singing him songs and showing him Molly the doll. He is perfect, Grace said, holding the baby against her chest while Harrison sat beside them on the bed. Everything is perfect. Harrison kissed her forehead, his heart so full he thought it might burst. I love you so much. I love you too. Thank you for giving me this family, this life. Thank you for showing me what love is supposed to be." Henry was an easy baby, happy and healthy. He grew quickly, reaching for everything, laughing at his sister's antics. Grace sewed him tiny clothes and Harrison carved him wooden toys. Rosemary helped with everything, proud of her role as big sister. 2 years later, their daughter Marie was born, a tiny thing with red hair like Rosemary and Catherine. Grace said she felt Catherine's presence in the room during the birth, as if Harrison's first wife was watching over them, making sure everything went well. Harrison chose to believe she was right. Life settled into a rhythm of work and family, of seasons passing, of children growing. They had challenges like the year the drought nearly ruined them, or the time Henry broke his arm falling out of a tree, or when Marie got scarlet fever, and they spent 3 terrifying days thinking they might lose her. But they faced everything together, drawing strength from each other, from the love they had built. Rosemary grew into a beautiful young woman, smart and capable. She married a rancher from White Oaks when she was 19, a good man named Thomas, whom Harrison approved of completely. At the wedding, Harrison danced with both his daughter and his wife, his heart full of pride and joy. Henry inherited his father's way with horses and his mother's kindness. He was 13 now, tall and lanky, always covered in dirt from working in the barn. Marie was 11, already showing Grace's skill with a needle, creating beautiful embroidery that people in town admired. One evening in the summer of 1893, Harrison and Grace sat on their porch watching the sunset. They were in their 40s now, gray threading through their hair, lines around their eyes from years of laughter and hard work. Their children were inside, Henry and Marie arguing over something trivial the way siblings do. "Do you ever think about how we met?" Grace asked, her hand in Harrison's. "All the time," Harrison admitted. "I think about finding that doll in the snow, about how broken everything was. And then I think about you sewing it whole again, and how you somehow sewed my heart back together at the same time." Grace leaned her head against his shoulder. "I was so broken when I came here, so convinced that I would never be whole again, never be worthy of love. And then there was you and Rosemary, needing help, giving me a purpose. You saved me just as much as I saved you." "We saved each other," Harrison said. "That is what love is, I think. Not one person rescuing another, but 2 people choosing to face life together, making each other stronger." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sky turn gold and pink and purple. In the distance, they could see their cattle grazing, the horses in the corral, the life they had built together. From inside the house came the sound of laughter as the children made peace, and then Marie's voice calling that supper was ready. "We should go in," Grace said, but neither of them moved yet. "In a minute," Harrison said. "I just want to sit here with you a little longer." Grace smiled and settled against him. "I can do that." As the stars began to appear, Harrison thought about the journey that had brought him here, the loss and grief, the terror of nearly losing Rosemary, the moment of finding that torn doll in the snow, how that one small thing had led him to Grace, had given him a second chance at love and happiness. He thought about Catherine and hoped she knew that he had kept his promise, that he had not shut himself away, that he had found love again without forgetting her. Life was not perfect. There were still hard days, still challenges and sorrows. But sitting here with Grace, their children happy inside their home, their ranch thriving around them, Harrison knew he was blessed beyond measure. He had been given not one, but 2 great loves in his life. And though the first had ended in tragedy, the second had healed him in ways he had not known were possible. "Come on," Grace said, standing and pulling him up. "Our children are waiting, and I made your favorite pie." Harrison followed her inside, into the warm lamplight, into the sound of his children's voices, into the life they had built together. As he sat down at the table with his family around him, Grace smiling at him from the other end, he sent up a silent prayer of gratitude for torn dolls and kind strangers, for second chances and new beginnings, for the love that had sewn his broken heart whole again. After dinner, while Grace supervised the children's evening chores and preparations for bed, Harrison found himself in Rosemary's old room, which they kept as a sort of guest room now. On the shelf sat Molly the doll, carefully preserved, even though Rosemary had long since outgrown playing with her. Harrison picked up the doll, running his fingers over the stitches Grace had made 15 years ago. The little embroidered heart was still there on the back, a reminder of the moment when everything had changed. "Finding old memories?" Grace asked from the doorway. Harrison turned, smiling at his wife. just thinking about how far we have come, how this little doll brought us together." Grace crossed the room, standing beside him. "It was not the doll. It was you having the courage to ask for help, and me having the chance to give it. The doll was just the excuse." "Maybe," Harrison allowed. "But I like to think Catherine had a hand in it somehow. She made this doll with love, wanting it to protect Rosemary. And, in a way, it did. It led me to you when we needed you most." Grace wrapped her arms around his waist, resting her head on his chest. "I like to think you are right. I like to think she sent me to you, knowing you would need someone." They stood there together, holding each other in the quiet room, surrounded by memories of the past and the promise of the future. From down the hall came the sound of Henry laughing at something Marie said, and Grace smiled. "We did good," she said softly. "We took our broken pieces and made something beautiful." "We did," Harrison agreed, "and I would not change a single moment of it." As they left the room, Harrison placed Molly carefully back on the shelf. The doll would stay there, a reminder of loss and recovery, of endings and new beginnings, of how sometimes the most broken things can be mended if you have love and patience enough to try. The years continued to unfold with their mixture of joy and challenge. Harrison's horse training business grew steadily, and he became known throughout the territory as someone who could gentle the wildest Mustang. Ranchers came from as far as Albuquerque and Santa Fe to buy horses from him. Grace's sewing and embroidery business also flourished, and she began teaching other women in town, creating a small community of craftswomen who supported each other. Henry proved to have his father's gift with horses, and by the time he was 16, he was working alongside Harrison as an equal partner. Together, they built a larger stable and brought in more stock. Marie, meanwhile, showed an unexpected talent for business, keeping the books for both Harrison's horse business and Grace's sewing enterprise. She had a head for numbers that neither parent possessed. When Rosemary's first child was born, a daughter she named Catherine Grace, Harrison held his granddaughter and wept. The circle of life, the continuity of family, the way love passed from generation to generation, overwhelmed him. Grace stood beside him, her hand on his shoulder, tears streaming down her own face. "Catherine would have loved this," Harrison said, looking down at the baby's perfect face. "She would have loved knowing her name continued." "She does know," Grace said with conviction. "I feel her presence sometimes, especially in moments like this. She is watching over all of us." They became active members of the Fort Stanton community, helping neighbors in times of need, contributing to the church, supporting new families settling in the area. Their home became known as a place where people were always welcome, where a meal could be found and a kind word given. Grace never forgot what it was like to be alone and afraid, and she made sure no one in her community had to feel that way if she could help it. The children grew and changed. Henry fell in love with a girl named Sarah from Lincoln, a school teacher with a practical nature and a warm heart. They married when Henry was 21, and she moved to the ranch, fitting into the family as if she had always been there. Marie showed no interest in marriage, declaring that she wanted to go to school in Santa Fe and study business. Harrison was initially hesitant about his daughter leaving home, but Grace encouraged it. "Let her fly," Grace told him. "Let her discover who she is meant to be. We raised her to be strong and independent. Now we have to trust that she will use those gifts well." So Marie went to Santa Fe at 18, and though Harrison worried, she thrived there. She wrote long letters home describing her classes, the city, the opportunities she was discovering. She eventually started her own business, buying and selling goods between Santa Fe and Fort Stanton, becoming quite successful. As Harrison and Grace entered their 50s, they slowed down a bit, letting the younger generation take on more responsibility. But they remained active, still riding out together to check on the herd, still sitting on the porch in the evenings, talking about their day. The love between them had only deepened with time, growing into something comfortable and sure, a foundation upon which everything else rested. One autumn evening, 23 years after they had first met, Grace came to Harrison with a request. "I want to find him," she said quietly. Harrison looked up from the harness he was mending. "Find who?" "My first husband, Marcus. I want to know if he is dead or alive, if he is still looking for me, or if he forgot about me long ago. I want to stop looking over my shoulder." Harrison set down his work. "Are you sure? We can just let sleeping dogs lie." Grace shook her head. "I need to know. I need to close that chapter completely so I can move forward without fear. Will you help me?" It took 3 months of letters and inquiries, working with a lawyer in St. Louis who specialized in such things. But eventually they got an answer. Marcus Whitaker had died 6 years earlier in Denver, killed in a bar fight. He had never remarried, never looked for Grace, had apparently drunk himself into an early grave. When Grace read the letter confirming his death, she sat down heavily in a chair. Harrison knelt beside her, taking her hands. "Are you all right?" he asked. "I am," Grace said, and he could see it was true. "I thought I would feel something, either relief or sadness or something. But I just feel empty about it, like he was someone I knew a long time ago in another life. He has no power over me anymore. He has been gone for 6 years, and I did not even know it, did not feel it. That tells me everything I need to know about how much he mattered." "You are truly free now," Harrison said. Grace cupped his face in her hands. "I have been free since the day I met you. This is just official confirmation." That night they burned the letter, standing together by the fireplace and watching the paper curl and blacken. It felt ceremonial, a final letting go of the past. Afterward, Grace seemed lighter, as if a burden she had carried for decades had finally been lifted. As they grew older, Harrison and Grace found joy in the small things. Morning coffee on the porch watching the sunrise. Working side by side in the garden Grace had planted. Evening walks along the creek that ran through their property. The arrival of more grandchildren, as Henry and Sarah had 3 children, and Marie eventually married a banker from Santa Fe and had 2 more. Family dinners that filled the house with noise and laughter and love. Harrison's hair went completely gray, then white. His hands grew gnarled with arthritis from years of hard work, but Grace would massage them in the evenings, working oil into the joints. And he would do the same for her shoulders that ached from hours of sewing. They took care of each other in these small ways, the daily acts of love that sustained a long marriage. On their 30th anniversary, their children threw them a party. The whole town seemed to turn out, filling the barn with music and dancing and celebration. Harrison danced with Grace as he had on their wedding day, and though they moved slower now, the love in their eyes was just as strong. 30 years, Grace marveled as they swayed together. It feels like yesterday and forever ago all at once. "Best 30 years of my life," Harrison said. "Even the hard parts, because we faced them together." "Do you have any regrets?" Grace asked. Harrison thought about it seriously. "Not about us, not about our life. I regret that I could not save Catherine, that Rosemary had to lose her mother so young. I regret that you had to suffer with your first husband before you found your way to me. But I do not regret a single moment since the day I walked into that boarding house with a torn doll in my hands." "Neither do I," Grace said. "You gave me a life I never dreamed I could have. You gave me safety and love and family. You gave me everything." They kissed there in the middle of the dance floor, surrounded by their children and grandchildren and friends, and everyone cheered. As they moved into their 60s, health challenges began. Harrison developed trouble with his heart, and Dr. Mitchell, who still practiced in Fort Stanton though he was quite old himself, prescribed rest and less strenuous work. Harrison chafed at the restrictions, but Grace was firm. "You are not working yourself into an early grave," she told him. "Henry can manage the horses. You are going to sit on that porch and watch, and be grateful you raised a son who learned your trade so well." Harrison grumbled but obeyed, and found to his surprise that there was satisfaction in watching Henry work with the horses, in seeing his son use the techniques he had taught him. He was leaving a legacy, passing on knowledge and skill to the next generation. That counted for something. Grace's eyesight began to fail, making the fine sewing work she loved difficult. But she adapted, taking on larger projects, quilts and curtains and clothing, rather than delicate embroidery. Marie sent her special glasses from Santa Fe that helped some, and she continued working, determined not to let age slow her down. They celebrated their 40th anniversary quietly, just the 2 of them and their children. Rosemary came from White Oaks with her husband and their 4 children. Marie traveled from Santa Fe with her husband and their 2 children. Henry and Sarah were there with their 3. The house overflowed with grandchildren ranging from infants to young adults, and the noise was tremendous. That night, after everyone had settled down to sleep in various corners of the house and barn, Harrison and Grace sat on their porch under the stars, as they had done thousands of times before. 40 years, Harrison said. We have been married longer than I was alive before I met you." Grace laughed. "That is a strange way to think about it, but I suppose it is true. We have lived more than half our lives together." "If I died tomorrow, I would die satisfied," Harrison said. "I have had more happiness than most men ever dream of. I have had 2 great loves, wonderful children, a good life. I have no complaints." "Well, I have a complaint," Grace said tartly. "You are not dying tomorrow or any time soon if I have anything to say about it. We have more grandchildren to meet, more sunrises to see, more life to live. Do not get comfortable with the idea of leaving me just yet, Harrison Vance." Harrison smiled and pulled her close. "Yes, madam, I will stick around as long as you will have me. That is what I like to hear." They lived another decade together, each year precious. They moved slower, slept more, needed help with tasks they once would have handled easily. But they faced aging the way they had faced everything else, together and with grace. Harrison was 74 when he died, on a warm summer morning with Grace holding his hand. His heart, which had been weak for years, simply gave out. He went peacefully, smiling at his wife, telling her he loved her one last time. Grace was devastated but not broken. She had lost before and survived, and she would survive this too. At the funeral, their children and grandchildren surrounded her, offering the support she had given them so many times. Rosemary, now 56 herself, stood on one side of Grace and Henry on the other, holding her up as she said goodbye to the man who had been her life for 49 years. They buried Harrison on the ranch, on a hill overlooking the property he had loved, next to Catherine. Grace had insisted, saying that both of Harrison's wives should be together, that they were all family now. On the headstone, she had carved Harrison Vance, beloved husband, father, grandfather. He lived with honor and loved with his whole heart. Grace lived another 5 years after Harrison passed. She stayed on the ranch, cared for by Henry and Sarah, surrounded by grandchildren and great-grandchildren. She continued sewing almost to the end, her gnarled fingers still creating beauty, even when her eyes could barely see. She told stories to the little ones about their grandfather, about the cowboy who found a broken doll, and in fixing it, found love. On her last day, Grace was clear-headed and calm. She gathered her children around her and told them she was ready to go, that she had lived a full life and had no regrets. She asked them to bury her between Harrison and Catherine, so the 3 of them could rest together. "We were all family," she said. "Catherine gave me Harrison and Rosemary, even if she did not mean to. She made that doll that brought us together. Honor her by keeping us all together now." She died that evening, peacefully in her sleep, with Rosemary holding one hand and Henry the other. She was 77 years old, and she had lived to see her children thrive, her grandchildren grow, her great-grandchildren born. She had known love and loss and love again, and she had helped build something beautiful that would endure long after she was gone. They buried her as she had requested, between Harrison and Catherine. On her headstone they carved Grace Ryland Vance, beloved wife, mother, grandmother, great-grandmother. She sewed broken things whole, and in doing so, healed broken hearts. Years later, when the grandchildren told the story of Harrison and Grace to their own children, they always started the same way. "Your great-great-grandfather found a doll in the snow," they would say. "It was torn and broken, and he could not fix it himself. So he found someone who could, a woman named Grace. She sewed that doll whole again, and without even knowing it, she sewed his broken heart whole too. And that is how our family began, with an act of kindness, a torn doll, and 2 people brave enough to love again after losing everything." The ranch stayed in the family for generations, each successive owner maintaining the graves on the hill, keeping the story alive, making sure that Harrison and Grace and Catherine were never forgotten. And on the mantel in the main house, carefully preserved under glass, sat Molly the doll, the little embroidered heart still visible on her back, a reminder that even the most broken things can be mended with patience, skill, and love. The end came not with drama or tragedy, but with the quiet satisfaction of lives well lived, of love given and received, of a family built on a foundation so strong it would endure for generations. Harrison had found his daughter's doll in the snow all those years ago, torn and broken. Grace had sewn it whole, and in that simple act of kindness had sewn his heart whole too, giving him a second chance at love and happiness. Together, they had built something beautiful, something that would last long after they were gone. And that, in the end, was all anyone could hope for.